Awesome. And we'll put this unlisted until Rajiv approves it. Make sure that it's okay. And if you guys have any problems. Okay, so questions for Rajiv about open pedagogy and what that means and what that looks like. Anyone can go.
I feel like I'm going to interrogate the premise of how you've just set this up just for a second.
Oh no. Okay. Okay. Rajiv has a question. Great. Fantastic.
Like, you know, the whole part of the point of open pedagogy is that I really don't have all the answers over here, but I'm hoping to sort of, you know, explore this with you. I'll offer my ideas, but I'm hoping that you will all do the same and push my thinking. So please.
Sorry, the dog had something to say about that. So that's awesome. That's awesome. No, none of us have all the answers. I actually hate the word expert for that very reason. I'm like, I'm an expert in what? I've been teaching for 20 years and I'm still like, no, I don't feel like an expert. But that's just me. You guys can be experts in whatever you need to be. Questions for Rajiv, or else he's going to go into his cool new stuff. Or I'm going to ask questions.
Well, I'm also,
one of the two.
I think I'm just also curious, just because, you know, based on the discussions you guys have been having, even if there's not a question, but there's something that you think you'd like to clarify, or something that resonated or that really didn't, and that would allow us to sort of pull some threads out a little bit.
I would maybe start. First, I'd like to say thank you to all you awesome instructional designers. I did a course in the fall about instructional design as part of my doctoral work, and my world has exploded. My mind has totally opened up, and it's really changed some of the parts of my teaching. And in the course that I teach, we have weekly discussion forums that students are expected to participate in. And what I did this term, our first week we did our usual thing, but the next week I totally opened it up, and I gave the students had 3 options of different activities. One was looking at myths around immunizations. One was looking at the intersection of the social determinants of health and health. And the last one was looking at primary prevention of cardiac disease. And I invited the students that instead of writing the 300-word post, to use their imaginations and find a new way to demonstrate their learning. They could do a video, they could make an infographic, they could do a short podcast or audio recording. And it has been such an amazing social constructivist term of learning that these students have just been creating such awesome resources. Like I've got some resources that at the end of the term, I'm going to ask the students if I can incorporate them into the course for the fall. It's just been so awesome. And the other thing we did was the first major assignment of the course, again, taking what I've learned about instructional design. The students are all over the country. So they broke up into groups of 2 or 3, and the assignment, because this has historically been a clinical and practice course, because of COVID, we've had to pull the practice piece out. So that forced me to redesign the first assignment of the course, which had been linked to their clinical practice site. So this term, we looked at COVID-19, social determinants of health, and the concept of advocacy, which is you know, a nursing competency as well as in other professions. So the students were challenged to create a learning artifact that that would speak to some issue around COVID-19, like maybe urban homelessness, misinformation, what's going on in the rural population, PPE, protective equipment in the community, those kinds of issues. And they created their learning artifact together and did all the research around that. And then they did a presentation. They had 15 minutes to present their process of the learning artifact, you know, what drew them to the issue, what group does this particular issue affect and why, what are social determinants of health that impact those kinds of things. And then they presented their learning artifact to the class. The class all did peer review on each other, on their learning artifacts, and then they had the opportunity to refine their product before submitting it to me. And the final part of the assignment was that each student did a self-assessment, self-evaluation on the group process and what their experience was. And again, it's blown my mind. I'm thinking I need to write a paper about it because it's been amazing. One of the students has applied for a grant as a result of her project, and you know, it's just been really neat to bring social constructivism in to a different place, I guess. So thanks, I'll be quiet now.
You don't have to be, Margaret. That was wonderful. That was very interesting to hear. Feel free to talk away. Does anyone else, although I'll ask for everyone else first, does anyone else have any thoughts, questions, things that struck you?
I think one of the things I'll just mention, because it sounds absolutely terrific what you're doing, and I know we often talk about how we witness the transformation in students, about how they see the meaning and the value in this sort of work and the pride that they take when they know it's not just for you, for example. But what's really evident, I think, to all of us as you're talking is the pride and excitement and the joy that comes across in how you are describing this project and how transformative it's been for you as an educator. So as you think about writing about it, I would be very grateful if you'd consider writing it up as a brief case study, what you just did for the Open Pedagogy Notebook. I think it would be a terrific example to profile.
Thank you, Rajiv.
I was curious if any of y'all have any examples that you've seen in the past or anything that stands out of a cool way that people used open pedagogy in STEM courses to promote social justice. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, it's always nice to see how other people have done it and then maybe modulate it. Right?
I
can kind of. Ooh.
Yeah, please, Heather, you go,
Okay.
and then I'll chime in if you don't say exactly what I'm thinking of.
So my open pedagogy project is my students actually create websites on the topics that we cover, so that my students are actually creating the textbook that we write. And so I'm not going to lie, they're not super great examples of incorporating social justice because that part of my journey is still developing. But what I plan on doing is having them incorporate a lot more issues of social justice into their websites. So instead of a textbook that just focuses on the content of DNA, actually I do have a good example of this, like the content of DNA. So they describe what DNA is on the homepage, and then instead of talking about Watson and Crick, there's actually an entire page about Rosalind Franklin. Not necessarily the best answer, but that's kind of what I'm building towards. And so instead of amplifying the white male voices that we're so used to seeing in our textbooks, having the students think about what stories they want to tell and whose voices they want to amplify it's really been interesting. And I can't wait to start doing it more now that I feel a little bit more comfortable in my own personal like anti-racist journey, that I feel like I can ask them to do those things rather than them actually taking the steps to do it themselves.
Yeah, so I saw that you posted the botany example. Rajiv, do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so that's a couple of different assignments I linked to by the same sort of faculty team. We have an open pedagogy fellowship that we run in partnership with Montgomery College in Maryland and now Maricopa Community Colleges in Arizona. So it's faculty working together to design renewable assignments that students will use, but it's multidisciplinary. So it's sort of the same core assignment that's bent in different ways. And that particular set of assignments was designed by a team that had so one person from urban ecosystems, one person from horticulture, and one person from anthropology, which is really fun. And they've picked the SDG having to do with food security. And so with a view to addressing food insecurity on our campuses, part of the assignments across these different jurisdictions was to identify things that might be regarded as weeds on the campuses across all of the institutions, mapping them out in a very public scientific database, but also sort of determining whether we're talking about a food desert or a food swamp, and actually just shedding more light on what is actually edible on campus. So it's I think, you know, part of this is as well, I think, is that sort of double chain where when you're engaging students in this work, part of the social justice piece is also that you're creating sort of a new generation of folks who are thinking about these issues, right, and are attentive to these issues. So, I mean, part of it is trying to address it as a public resource in this way, but also kind of creating, you know, hopefully another cohort, another generation. You're building that capacity and awareness. So there's a video on the website where the two faculty members describe this project. I'll link to that as well shortly, but that's what that project's about.
Awesome. And there's some, I'll have to find them. I'm not sure exactly where they are because the AAAS one that I linked, did I link it here? I might have linked it tomorrow on the lab one. There's a whole bunch of links in the next 2 days that have science-based open resources. And the AAAS one is nice because they take science articles, kind of sum them up, you know, give you the science article, give you the sum, give you the teacher stuff. And that's, I mean, the case studies are also that way, fit simulations are that way. But when you talk about the social justice piece, I've seen case studies and a couple of open things on COVID, and I think I saw one on the Australian bushfires, and I've seen a couple on climate change. So that's what I was going to mention, but I have no idea whether I'll be able to find all of that by tomorrow. We'll see.
Maybe it's worth also mentioning, I mean, I think when you talk about STEM work and open pedagogy that addresses social justice, I mean, I think there's broader projects anyway that can so easily be shifted. So the focus is more obviously social justice. So you think about all of the Wikipedia in the classroom type projects, right? And yes, you could do that to just augment, enhance articles or write articles from scratch for a variety of topics. But there's been such a vigorous, wonderful attempt to enhance the representation of women scientists in STEM on Wikipedia, for example. So I think that's part of what could be done. And then also looking for those opportunities to work across different jurisdictions. So, for example, you know, early on there was an open textbook that was published in astronomy, and again with this sort of sometimes unfortunate neo-colonialist mentality that seeps into this work, the assumption was, hey, we fixed that problem, we've got the astronomy text, let's move on to the next discipline. But hold on, you know, the sky looks a little bit different from the southern hemisphere, you might want to do some adaptation over there to think about broader accessibility. So I think there's fun little twists to what might be straightforward OER sort of open pedagogy projects to make it have more of an implication for inclusion and social justice.
Sorry, did I say that out loud? I might have said something snarky in chat. Okay, so in terms of the next possibility, you were gonna. I mean, I would love to keep the floor open for questions, but I really am dying to hear what Rajiv has to say about what's coming next. So if we don't mind, I might get him to do that, and then we can talk about more questions.
Sure. It's just a little bit of a foreshadowing. So I don't know when this will be out, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So I've been working for it was supposed to be out last year, but like pandemic happens. Yeah, but basically I've been working with Mahabali, who many of you have been interacting with at DPL, with Catherine Cronin, who's in Ireland, of course, and a huge figure in open pedagogy, Laura Chernovich, who's at the University of Cape Town, again, a just brilliant scholar in this space, and of course, Robin DeRosa, everybody's favorite person in the world. And the five of us have been curating a collection of articles, blog posts, from around the world, especially from underrepresented regions, marginalized scholars, student scholars, independent scholars, that is basically a collection of critical perspectives on open education. I expect that will be published in the next couple of weeks, of course, with an open license. So we'll be filtering that out and sharing that with the DigPed hashtag when it's available, but I thought that might be of interest to this group.
I've heard about this for a while, so I was hoping that was what you were going to talk about.
Yeah, it's definitely taken a while.
And there it is. Oh, yeah. No, that will be really, really interesting. I think it's really important. Doesn't it have a global South bent, particularly?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a determinant. There was quite a sort of a concerted effort to make sure we had representation from scholars across the world, definitely. And even though this is an English-speaking collection which has its own limitations, yeah, I think we've got about 40 or so authors. And yeah, I mean, you'll see it in the framing, you'll see it in the selection of the pieces, but you'll see it sort of at the evolution of the conversation. And the title of the volume is Open at the Margins, Critical Perspectives on Open Education. And that's partly because, I think as the movement has grown more diverse, more people have come into it, the voices have been a little bit different and not saying the same things. And it's been an interesting thing to witness that many of these voices, mine are probably among them, have been often regarded as, or mischaracterized as, this is problematic, or this is dissent, or there's incivility in the movement, there's an insurrection. And suddenly the Open Ed conference has to be rebuilt because there's too much, fractioning of calm down, the diversity is a strength. Let's talk about this. And so this is an effort to center the voices at the margins and to see how powerful that can be when you do that.
I was typing just as you said that you were just totally, I have a quote for tomorrow from a very prominent scientist on Twitter, and I was like, you just foreshadowed it. So well done, awesome. And we'll make sure we do what am I trying to say, link to her at some point. I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted. My dad was just sent to the hospital, so forgive me if I'm a little bit out of it. Joe, you were going to say something. Go for it.
Yeah, another question. So in some of the content we had to put together, or that Risa put together for us today, was Robin's, an interview with Robin. She was saying that she has students involved not only in the content in her courses, but also in the structure. So I was thinking logistically, if I was going to do that in my community college, which is definitely seeing these biology courses as like the prereq gateway to, like nursing and stuff like that, I could imagine that I would start to get some pushback from the different forces in the institution about course-to-course consistency, especially where they use things like GPA to, determine admissions. They'd really start to worry, if you're changing things for every section, every semester, how do we you know, and then I know the answer for this group would be like, how can you already, you know, like appropriately rank people like that? But I was curious if you've had conversations like that before, maybe have any advice on what that might look like?
So I think it's such a perfect question, because I think it's such a common like this tension, right? I mean, sort of the neoliberal university is upon us, definitely. Yes, let's all be standardized. Well, I think it's interesting, right? Because people have peculiar ideas about what these things mean, and I find you can even use neoliberal arguments to stave off these ridiculous sentiments. I mean, you know, sort of, if you operate from learning outcomes and move backwards, it doesn't really matter how you get there, as long as you attain the learning outcomes, right? As long as the students are able to demonstrate it, if you want to go in that direction. But, you know, I think typically, if you look at, you know, I've managed this in different ways. In some contexts, I've said, you know, yes, I understand, you know, all of this. It's really the fear is coming from a different place, maybe. So sometimes I've approached this by saying, you know what, all right, how about we do a pilot? We evaluate the impact of that pilot. We'll talk again in a year from now. And typically in a year from now, I will come back with data with better retention, better performance, higher student evaluations, all of this other stuff. So I was like, okay, we're meeting the same learning outcomes, plus we're exceeding in all of these other areas. And that does a lot to, forget administration for a moment, but even just in terms of the skepticism among the sort of less open-minded faculty, it does a lot to change the folks in the middle. So I think, you know, making it so that you make it easier, of course, where you can, you celebrate these things, so it becomes less a question of, oh, I might get into trouble to do these things, but, you know, I might actually receive support or recognition. You know, student associations do a great job of supporting this work, right? So I've seen student associations institute awards for innovative open education projects and open pedagogy, and all of a sudden it becomes an aspirational piece for faculty as well. There's different approaches, but it's always going to be tailored to the institution, I think. I mean, you're going to find your champions, find the spot where you're most likely to succeed, support that vigorously, and then use that as a model. But you do need to have a plan. And yeah, I don't think this is ever going to go away, because that fear comes in many different forms. And if it's not this, it'll come in a different cloak, I think.
Okay, that was awesome. Go ahead, Renee.
So I might add a little bit. I've done a big dramatic change to my grading over the last year. And luckily I'm in a situation, since I'm the only one who teaches labs, no one cares. But at some point someone might care. And so and also I'm publishing it, so I'm waiting for the pushback. So one of the things I'm doing is, from the beginning, saying, here is what I've said I want them to be able to do when they leave the class. Here is how I am measuring them doing those things. Here is the evidence that everyone who earned this grade did those things, which I think is a much stronger argument than I gave A's to 20% of the class. Because 20% of the class in a given term may not be the same as the previous term, right? So I've been holding it up that way, a sense of like, I am laying out exactly what you have to have accomplished to get this grade. And therefore, I think I'm in a stronger position to back up my grades than I would have ever been before. And so that's kind of how I'm anticipating pushback and being prepared to deal with it in advance. But I think Rich is right. It's never going to go away. Like, we're going to keep getting it.
Yeah, and just to chime in, I mean, I think even projects, especially since this is STEM, I mean, LibreTexts, that hyper library, began as you know, ChemWiki, and one of the reasons why it took off so much and gained so much institutional traction is because it was the most visited chemistry website in the world, right? And it was built by students, but it was hosted on you know, at the University of California, Davis, I want to say. But what was interesting, talking to Delmar Larson about this a few years ago, is alumni, donations, reputation started to influence some of those decisions behind it. So I think, you know, again, with publications, you can talk about, you know, yes, I want to publish in the most prestigious journals, but if I want to wield the neoliberal metric, against the idiots in the room, what I would say is, fine, let me publish open access. I'll show you the open access citation advantage, and I'll come back to you with something that will address your concerns. So just in terms of the, I think you can get a lot of good publicity about this, and especially when folks who have these concerns see that, wait a minute, this is not just about teaching and learning, this is enhancing our reputation. There's suddenly stories in the press where receiving these accolades at regional meetings. The people who initially have little wariness around it will sometimes start to become the people who ask you for the language that they can insert in their public statements to sort of add to their, here's our yearly roundup of highlights, and suddenly you're in that highlight. It's like, wait a minute, this has come a long way. It happens.
I've also seen LibreText change a lot over the last several years. I was asked by the state of California to review it as like an open textbook. And God, that was maybe 6 years ago. And at that point, my answer for organic chemistry was no. I'm sorry, it's just not there yet. It's just not. And I still think it's not there, but it's closer. One of the things that one of my colleagues in general chemistry says he has a concern about using theirs for general chemistry is visuals and the lack of visuals. And that he's a chem ed person, like a hardcore chem ed person. He said, we have all of this evidence on what types of visuals students need to be able to go from, atomic level to bulk properties, and it's just not there. And so, and it's in the publisher's textbooks because they're paying an artist to do it. And so I think one of the next questions, I think if you really want to get some of the open textbooks off the ground in a bigger way, is that piece needs to be addressed. I don't know how, but that piece, unfortunately, unless you get a lot of really kind people who want to donate their time, becomes now we have a money issue again.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think LibreText is making some really good strides now in that direction, integrating simulations and Jupyter Notebooks and many other things in that system, H5P. But yes, and the issue you raise, I think, is it comes back to the social justice question as well, is, there are such tangible benefits to the institution, for example, on enrollment, on persistence, on completion, on success, that certainly my institution and others see the rationale for investing in this work. So it is incredibly important, I think, that educators are properly compensated for this labor, right? So not undercompensated, not voluntary work, because again, otherwise you will end up with those who are privileged enough to have a great salary, who can forego that extra income, other people whose ideology ends up being overrepresented in the available OER. So it's at a deeper level, I think, incredibly important, not just to get pragmatically things having the bells that you need to gain wider traction and adoption, but just also so that it is more inclusive as a process. And so we're not harming people on the way to trying to say, well, we're going to widen access, but we're going to trample on, voluntary labor on the way.
That's one of the places that kind of sold me for open pedagogy, actually, and trying to get my students to do things, because I've had several students throughout the years who make these amazing drawings that I was like, if only I could capture this. I mean, they did it as part of the class. That was part of what they did. They needed that in order to keep themselves going. And I was like, that would be like, if we actually put that kind of formally into a student-led book, and it would have to be iterative, and it would have to be, it would take 5 years to make it happen for chemistry, but it might be worth kind of thinking about early, because why not?
For a while, I've been thinking about eventually forming a collaboration with the visual design department at my community college and the art students, and giving them specific assignments to add in the analogies I use in class for my OpenStacks and create my version of that. So while it probably wouldn't be the same level of quality because they don't have the training that a scientific visual design person has, I do think that there are some things that you could accomplish with that level. And then I think that'd be a cool way to build their resumes. So I think that might be kind of fun to try.
And like we have a site license to AutoCAD and all kinds of other kinds of design programs that would actually allow you to do the scientific drawing. It just takes kind of redirecting their ideas towards that. Might be interesting. Go for it.
I've seen some really good examples, at least in bio. I mean, this is pretty bio specific, but where students take images in lab with their cell phones and then license those images to add to a lab manual that is then openly licensed, because then, you know, because I don't want to spend 14 hours going around taking photographs of everything that have to be in my lab manual, right? And so that's, I've seen that done a couple of times. Because I mean, the students, we all use our phones all the time now. And the cameras on the phones today are absurd and work really well with microscopes. Or you could purchase like the mounts for the cell phones. But I've definitely seen that done. And then they share them on Twitter or Instagram, and they have a Creative Commons license attached to it. And then once it's licensed, the instructor can then use it for the manual or whatever.
Absolutely. And so I mentioned H5P in passing, and I'll just echo that over here because it's such a user-friendly sort of interface. It doesn't have a steep learning curve. And we have an amazing number of instructors who've embedded H5P into their course assignments. And that's partly because, you know, students can build this stuff in H5P within Pressbooks, for example, if you're talking about an open textbook type project, or within the learning management system that also embeds H5P for us in Moodle. But it's wonderful because it's an individual sort of discrete objects. They're interactive, they enhance things. So for example, we often have straight open textbooks that maybe have images, maybe the odd video, but the idea is let's work with students as an open pedagogy project to make it interactive. So then it's whether it's formative questions, could be interactive timelines, much more interesting, or, you know, other kinds of things, you know, clickable hotspots. So imagine, you know, neuroanatomy and sort of tagging with hotspots, you know, different lobes of the brain or elements of neuroanatomy. It would be a simple example. It literally takes about 10 or 15 minutes to put together an H5P object like that. And again, the best ones become embedded in the book. Students then get credited as co-authors as well, of course, in the adaptation, which is lovely. But it's a very sort of low barrier, easy way, I think, to involve student pedagogy in existing OER that is maybe not quite up to snuff. And then, of course, it becomes enhanced over time. And the other thing is, of course, looking at this work as collaborations. So we have folks where across institutions, maybe, you know, what my students will create, Montgomery's students will peer evaluate, for example, and vice versa. It's interesting to look at sort of the open boundary courses in that way, breaking outside of a specific classroom. Different ways to do it, but all, I think, low barrier.
I love H5P. The low barrier part of it is really exciting. I had a question going back up to Jupyter Notebooks, because it looks super, super cool, but it sometimes seems like the opposite of like low barrier to get started in. For people who have used it, like what level do you start using it and how do you make it user-friendly to pick up?
So I use them with juniors and seniors in PCAM Lab, and we have a whole sequence of, well, it's going to have to be web tutorials this year. Usually I'm there like over their shoulder. I walk them through how to get the installation. We use Anaconda, so you just download one package. It's huge, it takes forever to install, but then you have it and Jupyter Notebooks are there. I've got like screenshots of how to open everything up. And the beautiful thing about Jupyter Notebooks is you can use a notebook to teach how to use a notebook. So the first notebook they open is, hey, this is a Jupyter Notebook. It has code and I'm talking to you right now. Now type hello world in the next thing and press shift enter. I would say first semester, maybe 70% of my students get it. And a lot of them are engineers who had to learn MATLAB before they get me. The chem majors, I have to, like, it's really funny because they're like, I don't want to code, and the engineer I'm working with does, so I'm just going to let the engineer code. Well, all the chem majors have me again second semester, and there's no option there. There's nobody else to lean on, so they have to do it second semester. And they do all get it. It takes them quite a while, and luckily my course is, like, it's a lab course, so the programming content is only part of it along the way. But it's kind of nice for them because they just, like, get a piece of it in September and they get another piece of it in October. And then in February, when they have me the second time, I slam them with, like, you actually have to know how to do this now. And by that point in time, they've picked up enough of it that it does seem to work really well. And I would say 100% of my students have it by halfway through the second semester, and it's not a focus of the course.
Good. It's good to hear stories of persistence working out with that before I recommend it to people. So yeah.
And I'd be happy to share any of the notebooks that I have showing students how to get started and the materials that I give them. It's gone through one entire class of students working from I don't know anything to they're, like, inventing their own little things. So they're in the beta version. It's been alpha tested and they're working pretty well. So if anyone wants my notebooks, I'd be happy to share them.
I might contact you as I start to figure out what instructors are working on here. So thank you.
So Rajiv has left us because he had to go. He's a busy dude. I was thinking of stopping recording. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah, okay.